Imagine yourself playing your favorite video game back in the day. Depending on your age, that day might be in the 80s, 90s, or the early 2000s. Press that button, hear some of that familiar static, and you're ready to play. You have no idea that the display you're playing this game on will become obsolete and ultimately forgotten by the general public. One could argue that current displays for playing video games are better than they've ever been before and are getting even better with each passing year as developments in 4K OLED tech are reaching modern handheld video game consoles. Even after all of the developments of modern gaming and emulation, passionate gamers are still using these old school displays all these years later. These TVs are a window into the past, the ultimate nostalgic way to enjoy the media of our childhood. In the last 15 years, there's been a major resurgence in video game collecting. It used to be, you couldn't give these old TVs away for free because nobody wanted them. And today, new 4K televisions are now more affordable than ever before. Why would we want these old, bulky CRT televisions when we have newer, brighter, thinner, and more high-resolution screens that take up much less space?
Hey everyone, Travis Bowman here. I'm a fingerstyle guitar player and retro video game nerd, and yes, I'm a huge fan of CRT televisions. Some would say that I'm a CRT freak. At this time, I've got 7 different CRTs in my house. In this video, we're going to talk about why you would want a CRT these days, go over the specs of some of the most desirable sets, and help you figure out which is the best CRT for you and your setup, if a CRT is best for you and your setup. These things are awesome, but they just might not be for everyone. Let's take a look at what CRT televisions can offer you. Welcome to the ultimate CRT beginner's guide.
You've likely heard the term CRT several times throughout your life, but what does CRT actually mean? By definition, a CRT means that it's a cathode ray tube. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on how CRTs work on the inside. It's actually pretty complicated. But here's the gist of it. These displays use an actual vacuum tube to shoot electrons on a phosphorescent screen, and that's the simple explanation. In order to do this, you need a lot of real estate inside of the TV to house the electron gun and the tube. That's why most of these larger sets have a pretty big rear end like this one. Of course, these displays are obsolete now because we have LCD displays that don't require electron guns. Pretty much every display these days takes up a total of just a few inches and sometimes less, versus the few feet that were needed for a CRT. CRTs are mainly coveted by dudes like me, guys in their 30s and 40s that are really nostalgic for the golden age of video games. Sure, there are enthusiasts of all flavors out there that will also be into these things. You've got VHS collectors, classic PC connoisseurs, but most of us who still buy and collect CRTs use them for playing retro video game consoles. Fighting game tournaments still often use CRTs for their lack of input lag. The main reason why you'd want a CRT over a modern display for retro video games is really simple. Think about your old Nintendo 64. It's a great console that introduced us into the brand new world of 3D video gaming with Super Mario 64. A great game that really made us feel like we were playing something monumental and special. And of course, we really were. Fast forward to today. You're older now, and maybe you've got kids of your own. Millennials were born at the best time in history for video gaming, in my opinion. We grew up at the beginnings of the internet, we were the generation that grew up with 2D gaming as small kids, and we were front and center for 3D gaming taking over the market. It's actually kind of crazy knowing that you were there for the heyday of 2D gaming and watched 3D slowly take over. Video games grew up with us. That's why this generation is so nostalgic for classic consoles. Kids that were born to millennials also have it really good. Imagine the memories that a kid can have playing his mom or dad's older video game console. For a hardcore nerd turned parent, this is eventually going to be a mandatory rite of passage. Sharing your childhood nostalgia is a special thing. And if you've got someone that's wanting to do that very thing with you, consider yourself loved by that person.
So the Nintendo 64 is nostalgic and great and all that jazz, but what does this have to do with the CRT display? Well, have you tried hooking up your old N64 lately?
With rapid advances of modern displays, it's not as easy to play these old consoles as it once was. The elephant in the room is that you have absolutely nowhere to plug your N64 in on your fancy pants 4K OLED display. All you've got is HDMI, and HDMI did not exist when the N64 released in 1996. We wouldn't see this video cable become widely adopted by the public until 2002. The first console to feature an HDMI output was the Sony PlayStation 3 all the way back in 2006.
The great thing about modern advancements is that they often trickle down to older hardware. If you've been following my channel for a while, then you know that I love when modern tech comes back to aid and even enhance older technology. However, we've got several options depending on your budget and your patience.
You can get an HDMI modification for your Nintendo 64, but it's going to cost you well over $100 for parts, and you're going to have to get this thing installed, which requires soldering. Most people shudder at the idea of opening up anything hardware related, but there are folks out there that have become more than proficient in modifying older video game systems. Some offer these mods as a service, and you'll have to pay them for that service as well as shipping your console back and forth. That's going to end up being pretty expensive when it's all said and done. Yes, you can buy an HDMI adapter on Amazon for super cheap, but in the world of video upscalers and cables, you always get what you pay for. And a $30 experience isn't worth it, my friends. Sure, it looks acceptable depending on your preference, but that input lag is going to absolutely kill your Nintendo 64 experience. That's another solid reason for gaming on a CRT. These things just don't have any input lag at all. If you've never experienced input lag, then you've likely never tried to hook up your old console to a modern display. Not doing well in a game due to input lag instead of lack of skill can be beyond frustrating. Video upscalers have come a long way since the 2014 introduction of the once heavily coveted XRGB Mini FrameMeister from Micomsoft. Fast forward to today, and the RetroTink 4K is likely one of the best upscalers we will ever see, but it's selling brand new at the steep price of over $700. Yeah, we'll talk more about that later in this video. Why would you spend $30 on a cheap adapter that likely won't function properly, or pay almost $1,000 for an upscaler when you can get an old CRT for cheap or even for free? The main argument against this is space. The common claim is, I don't have the space in my home for a big fat CRT TV anymore. Personally, I think that this is a ridiculous statement considering that this was a normal thing for everyone just over 20 years ago. Did our living space really shrink that much in just a few years? You can manage a CRT even if you're living in a small apartment. Sure, the TV space has gotten a lot wider and a lot less deeper in that time, but you can still find space in the tiniest of homes to include a CRT if you really want one. Just find a corner in your house, get a very affordable wire rack like this one, and boom, nostalgia corner. If you're truly a hardcore nerd, then this shouldn't be an issue, and hey, it's a conversation piece for guests in your house. Right?
As we explore in just a little bit, CRTs come in all shapes and sizes. There's definitely a set out there that you can squeeze into your gaming setup. I think that the "I just don't have space" claim is just an excuse at this point. What these people really mean is that they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have to move things around to accommodate for a CRT, and you know what? That's totally fine. Like I stated in the beginning of the video, CRTs aren't for everyone.
If you've never enjoyed a retro video game console on a CRT, then you're likely very young. I would encourage you to try it out at least once in your lifetime because these things aren't being manufactured anymore. Depending on your area, CRTs could be super easy to find or impossible to find. The average consumer has long since sold or thrown out their CRT in favor of the next big thing in display technology: LCDs, plasma screens, and eventually OLED displays. Still, there's a reason why there's a big community of people that still enjoy their CRT televisions. It's like looking back into the past, while simultaneously seeming kind of futuristic. I always think of those cheesy sci-fi movies from the 80s and 90s. Total Recall starring Arnold Schwarzenegger is a really great example. The movie takes place on Mars, and yet everyone is still using CRTs. It's really hard to describe, but viewing movies, shows, and video games on a CRT is an experience that you kind of have to be a part of in person. Don't take my word or anything that you see in this YouTube video as a perfect example. They kind of have to be seen in person. That CRT glow, man. That CRT glow. Of course, we need to address the obvious, as I'm sure someone in the comments section likely already has. Why would you do all of this when you could just emulate these old games on your computer? If this is your mindset, then I'll just go ahead and say that although you make a good argument, you're already missing the point of this video. We choose to use old hardware and old TVs because we still can. We can still enjoy history even though it's old and outdated. Maybe it's just nostalgia taking us over, or maybe it's because these older video games actually legitimately do look the best on these old school displays. After all, these games were designed to be played on a CRT.
So you've decided that you want to look into getting a CRT TV for your setup. That's awesome. But before we go out searching for a CRT, we're going to need some valuable input.
The first question you need to ask yourself is, what do I want to connect to this CRT? Keep in mind that over the last 4 decades of video gaming, there are a ton of different video output options for each console. Some consoles are capable of multiple ways of displaying video. There's no way that I could list every video output for every console in this video, but I'll give you a few ideas after we go over each video input. Just know for the best results, you'll have to do your own research for your specific setup. However, feel free to join my free Discord server if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to help you get the right cable for your console and CRT of choice. Link is in the description of this video. Let's go over the 6 basic inputs that you might find on CRT televisions. RF is a very outdated connection type that was pretty terrible even in its time. It stands for radio frequency, and all of the video and audio information is sent through one coaxial cable. Older fellows like myself remember having to screw in this cable to the TV when we wanted to watch Disney movies on an old VCR. There are still those out there that swear by this connection, but those guys can be considered to be a niche within a niche within a niche. I don't mean to offend any of you guys, but come on. This is a terrible way to play video games these days. It hasn't aged well at all. The only console that you would need this connection for is arguably the Atari 2600, and that's because the console doesn't have any other means of connecting to a display without any further modifications. I would really recommend doing a composite mod on that old Atari, by the way. Honestly, if you connect a console using RF, you're probably going to have a bad time. There are much better connections out there that can give you a better experience on your CRT. Don't let RF be your first CRT television experience. You and that TV deserve much more than that. Pretty much every CRT that you'll find will have RF as a connection type, because that's just how we connected cable TV back in the day. Some CRTs only have RF, and I would really highly encourage you to pass on those sets. Trust me, it gets so much better than this. Now, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, every video cable that I'll mention in this video is pretty cheap. RF is worth a little less than dirt, in my opinion. A few consoles that can accept an RF output signal are the Atari 2600, the TurboGrafx 16/PC Engine, and the NES. Yes, composite video cables, the old school red, yellow, and white input cables that pretty much every console and media player had back in the day. A common term for these would be RCA cables. A good majority of CRTs will have that input directly on the front panel of the display, so it's pretty easy to spot. Most hardcore gamers will tell you that composite is absolutely terrible and disgusting, and they aren't that far off. But in reality, I think that composite gets a terrible reputation because of the advancements in future video cables that we'll talk about in just a little bit. It's really hard to go back to composite when there are many other options that are just better. Actually, composite is considered bad because it carries the video information all on one line. In this case, it's always the yellow cable. And the red and white cables carry your left and right audio signals. As a result, the picture can be pretty ugly and washed out. These colors seem to bleed together, and it's just really a super messy, smudgy image, especially when compared to modern consoles and displays. However, composite is by far the most common cable you'll find for most retro video game consoles, and a good majority of them shipped with composite cables. This cable goes as far back as the NES and as far into the future as the PlayStation 3. That's well over 20 years of composite cables, my friend. If you're looking into buying some retro consoles, these cables are basically unavoidable. It's better than nothing though, right? Composite is likely going to be your first experience on your new CRT journey, so I say embrace it. Enjoy it if you can. Some CRTs only featured RF and composite video inputs. If you find a CRT for free, it's likely going to have composite. Give it a try for yourself before writing it off. If anything, it's a great comparison to the great quality that we're about to look at. Some consoles that feature composite video outs are the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Nintendo 64, Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and countless others. Now we're getting into something special. Special video? Is that what that means? No. S-video actually separates the color and brightness into two different signals, resulting in a much better and clearer video signal. In fact, S-video actually stands for separate video. The common understanding between retro gamers is that the best jump in video signal quality is from composite to S-video, and it's really hard to argue with. S-video was first commonly used around 1987, and it was used well into the late 90s. A lot of history's favorite video game consoles shipped with composite, with S-Video being an optional upgrade. Finding a CRT with this video port isn't impossible, but it's not nearly as common as composite. To my knowledge, there aren't any S-Video only CRTs out there. If a CRT has S-Video, then it also has composite and RF as well. If you find a CRT with this input, I would highly encourage you to grab it, just so you can see how great it truly looks. In my opinion, S-Video is the underdog of the bunch. Not a lot of people remember this option, but it's by far one of the best out there. Finding a display with S-Video isn't as common as a composite-only set. Some consoles that featured S-Video out include the Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, Sega Saturn, and the Sony PlayStation. And now we're on to the big daddy of video cables for analog video game consoles. We're now taking the video signal and separating it into 3 different cables. Component video is the common name, but this is actually YPB-PR. All that means is that we're taking the color and video information and separating it even further than S-Video, resulting in a truly beautiful, crisp picture. These 3 cables carry luma, meaning the brightness or luminance, and sync information. PB, which is the color difference between blue and luma, and PR, which is the color difference between red and luma. And again, that's the simple explanation. This video standard was introduced to consumers in the 90s, but we often think of these cables as being associated with consoles and media players of the early 2000s. I remember my dad getting a DVD player around the year 2000 that had these cables with it. Video game consoles didn't fully start taking advantage of this until the PlayStation 2 era. Of course, that means that there's a large chunk of retro consoles that don't support this video standard out of the box. However, there are a few companies out there that manufacture these cables and design them for use with older consoles such as the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and more. These are often referred to as HD Retrovision cables and are available to purchase on a few websites that I'll link in the description below. However, don't think that you're going to get some crazy 1080p image out of these things. They can only do 240p, just like the consoles back then could. Some of these first-party component cables aren't nearly as common as their composite counterparts. Some of them are actually pretty rare and expensive, such as the official component cables for the Nintendo GameCube and the original Xbox. If you want to hook up your GameCube to a CRT, I would highly encourage you to go with S-Video, unless you want to spend over $200 on some official component cables. There are third-party alternatives that have crept up on the market in the last few years, such as the Carby HDMI adapter and the Eon, which is what I use for my GameCube. This thing is pretty awesome. It lets you use either HDMI or component out using the really cheap and easy to find Wii component cables. This might be the best alternative out there if you really want to hook up your GameCube with component cables. Because of the similarities with their names, people often confuse component and composite cables. I once got into an argument with a Game Exchange employee over this. I wanted to buy a composite cable that they had for sale. He swore up and down that it was actually called a component cable. The look on his face when his manager corrected him in front of him, me, and everybody else in the store will forever bring me the greatest of joys. I was wearing a Sega CD shirt during this exchange too. Component cables really represent some of my favorite gaming experiences in my lifetime, and I highly recommend that you try to hunt down a CRT with this input. Some common consoles that take advantage of component cables would be the original Xbox, Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and the Nintendo Wii. And now we're moving on to my favorite way to hook up retro consoles to a CRT. RGB SCART is a European video standard that we never got in the United States. To the average American, I'd imagine that this video cable looks very strange, but to Europeans, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. A lot of European CRTs included this input right on the back of the TV back in the day. To anyone from Europe that's watching this video right now, American nerds are really jealous of how good you guys had it back in the day. RGB and component video are pretty much the same in terms of quality. Some CRTs can take full advantage of this, but others won't have that ability unless it's been modified. More info on that a little later in the video. SCART cables are available for pretty much any retro gaming console that you can think of these days, and it's how I have the majority of my consoles hooked up to be played on both my modern and retro displays. You can even use a SCART cable on the Xbox 360 if you really want to. This is a really great way to watch TV shows and movies on a CRT, by the way. Component video will work the same way. You just need a console that's capable of using either component or SCART and a way to play that media. The PS2 and original Xbox can play DVDs, and you can even plug in an external hard drive to your Xbox 360 or PS3 to watch movies that way. It's kind of crazy how good some older movies and TV shows will look on a CRT, especially if they were originally recorded in a 4x3 format. It's important to note that a few different signals can be sent via SCART cables. You can do composite over SCART, but you want to make sure that the cables you purchase are verified to do RGB SCART. I got into these cables because they're surprisingly easy to buy online despite never being a standard cable in my country. You can find these cables on Amazon for about 10 to 20 bucks per console, but remember, you always get what you pay for with video cables. These cheap SCART cables have been proven to have awful shielding and can result in a ton of unnecessary video noise. It can be really disgustingly distracting on a modern display, but you'll even see some of it on a CRT. A decent SCART cable that's built with the correct shielding will run you anywhere between 30 to 50 bucks a cable. I promise it's worth that extra money to get a decent picture. I would recommend looking into Insurrection Industries for a good quality SCART cable that won't break the bank. You can get them from Stone Age Gamer. I'll put links in the description if you want to check that out. Nintendo consoles are the worst about simply not supporting RGB SCART. However, there are mod kits available to restore this video signal to some of these Nintendo consoles. The Super Nintendo is a really good candidate to start with, especially if you're new to soldering. I did this mod myself, and it wasn't too difficult at all. Before we end this section, we have to talk about connecting this RGB SCART cable to your American CRT. Surprise! We don't have that input on the back of these sets. There are specific sets called PVMs that can handle these cables with the proper adapter, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Generally, you can't take advantage of RGB SCART on your CRT unless that CRT has component video in. Remember when I said that RGB and component are basically the same thing? You can find SCART to component transcoders out there that are pretty decent quality for less than 50 bucks. Odds are that if you're looking to hook up one console via RGB SCART, you'll get addicted and want to look into ways of hooking up multiple consoles via RGB SCART. I fell into this deep, dark rabbit hole myself years ago. There are RGB SCART switchers out there, just like there are switchers for component and composite. The super premium switcher that everyone recommends is either the G-SCART or the Hydra. You'll be spending at least a few $100 on those, but they're some of the best that money can buy. I myself started out with this really expensive switcher from ShinyBow that gave me 6 inputs with 2 outputs. It was pretty cool because it came with a remote allowing you to display 2 different consoles on 2 different displays at the exact same time. However, I took a chance on some much cheaper automatic switchers from AliExpress, mostly because I wanted to hook up several more consoles at once. This 10-in, 3-out switcher has been great for me, and I've had 0 issues with it, and the quality is actually pretty darn good. You'll have to do more of your own research to determine which SCART switcher will be the right fit for your setup. I'm sorry that you now know how awesome RGB SCART is. Good luck hopping down that rabbit hole, my friends. Some consoles that support RGB SCART without modification are the Sega Genesis, Master System, PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, Neo Geo CD, and the Xbox 360. And finally, we're talking about HDMI. No, seriously, some CRTs in the early to mid 2000s featured HDMI inputs on them. A lot of people swear by these for retro gaming, but the experts have determined that they can introduce a lot of lag, which is not a great thing for consoles that need an analog input such as component or composite. Light guns are amazing peripherals that give you this awesome arcade experience on your home console, but these HDMI CRTs won't work with them. Huge bummer. These HDMI sets seem to cause a ruckus between CRT enthusiasts. Some guys really love them, but others don't see the point. Why would you want to use an HDMI console on a CRT when you can just plug it into your modern display instead? I guess because you can. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hunt down an HDMI CRT for this video. They're kind of uncommon, or at least they are in my area. Still, if you find one for a decent price, they can be really awesome if you just want to hook up a PS3 or Xbox 360. So now that we've covered the main video inputs on these things, it's time to figure out which kind of CRT is going to be best for you. Over the years, I've collected a few CRTs of different sizes, shapes, and means of function. Let's get close and personal with each of them, so you can decide which one of them would be best for your personal needs and setups. We'll also talk about where I found each of these sets, as well as some tips and tricks to do some CRT hunting of your own. Let's get started. So here's the first TV that we're going to take a look at today. This is a 13-inch Sony. More often than not, if you're going to be looking for a CRT, you're going to find one that's kind of sort of like this. Some of them actually had either a DVD player or a VCR built into them, if you can believe that. This one here is one of the more desirable ones just because it is a Sony Trinitron. You don't really have a lot going on as far as inputs. You can see on the front there, somewhere around here, you've got your composite inputs and you've got an RF input on the back, and that's pretty much it with these things. You can still find them for cheap if you look in the right spot, but that being said, this is a 13-inch television. So imagine yourself
and what you're actually going to be using this stuff for, do you really want to sit this close to this kind of TV if you're going to be playing some video games? You might want to go for like a 20-inch or something like that. But still, if you have a setup where you want to, sit at a computer desk or something and have this on your computer desk, this is a great TV for that. And you can even get on your computer and find a driver for specific graphic cards that allow you to actually take the signal of your computer and put it into your TV. So that's also a really cool thing as well. But other than that, this is just your standard 13-inch television. Now, I actually picked this one up from a buddy of mine named Brian, and he picked it up for $5 at some sort of estate sale, and I gave him a $20 bill for it, which is, he got it for a hell of a steal, and I got a pretty good deal on it too. 20 bucks for a TV like this, which is really kind of difficult to find for that Sony, but it's still a really, really cool TV. I'm really glad to have it. And let's move on to the next one. Up next, we have this teeny tiny little guy right here. So this looks a little bit different from all of the other CRTs that we're going to take a look at today. It's really teeny tiny. This is actually an 8-inch PVM, which stands for Professional Video Monitor, and we'll talk about all that stuff a little bit later in this video. This is a very expensive thing. Maybe not this particular size, but PVMs are very, very desirable because of the picture quality and how great retro games can look on these things. Now, you probably wouldn't want this though, even though it is really cool, and that's definitely the reason why I have it, but this is my first PVM that I ever got. I got it on a Craigslist ad years ago. So these were actually used like in the field if you're doing video work and stuff like that. I actually have the bag to go with it, and I'll try to put it in the bag and get you that footage just to see what it looks like. But if we turn it around, the reason that these things are so desirable is because of the inputs that it offers you. This is RGB capable, just sitting right here as it is. We've got these little inputs down here, and that's where the RGB is located. You can do composite, and I think even S-video with some of these things, but you'll need something like this if you want to do a component input. This is a BNC to RCA adapter. So BNC is a PVM sort of specific thing, and I'm sure it's used for a lot of other stuff too, but for our purposes, BNC is that right there, what I just did. So you kind of screw that in and you lock it in place. Now, it's exactly like those other connectors that we have already talked about, but the difference with the BNC is that you lock it in place so that way nothing flies out. And that's probably a really good measure to take if you're doing something really important like medical monitoring, or if you're out in the field doing some sort of journalistic work, if you've got some video stuff going on out there. And I'm pretty sure that's exactly what the PVM like this was used for. You can see down here, you've got these little battery doors. So this was a mobile setup at some point. If you have the batteries and they were charged, you could take this out wherever you needed to at the time and get a lot of footage and use this as monitoring to make sure that you've got what you need. As for video games though, maybe not the best monitor because it is really teeny tiny, but still, it's just a novelty at this point, and that's why I still have it. I couldn't bring myself to sell it because even though I probably don't use it as much, it's a novelty. And you can take something like the PSP Go, which is already a teeny tiny little screen, and plug this in with component, and you've got just a little bit of a bigger screen. So like I said, novelty, but this little PVM is really, really cool, and I'm super glad to have found it for 60 bucks back in the day on Craigslist. So now we've got an RCA TruFlat, and the TruFlat means that it's actually a flat screen CRT, which isn't as common as pretty much every other CRT that you're going to find out there, but they do exist and you can still find them out there. This one I actually got fairly recently, and unfortunately it's got some problems, so I can't really use it to its full potential right now, but this is a really nice CRT when it's working. I've got S-video, got RF and composite and component, which is the main reason that I wanted this thing to begin with. The thing that sucks though is that it's not really working in component right now. And I haven't really figured out the problem just yet. And that's not a testament to these TruFlats because I think I just got unlucky with this one, but at the same time, I got it for a really good deal. I found it on the Facebook Marketplace, and the guy had had it for a really long time. And so I asked him, was he open to any trades or anything? And it just so happened that he was in the market for a guitar. And I had a cheap classical guitar that I paid pretty much nothing for, and voila, here we go, trade. This thing was absolutely filthy. I'm pretty sure I still have some footage of me cleaning this thing, and if I do, I'll pop that up on the screen right now. It was very, very filthy. That probably has something to do with it not working right now. However, I think it could be something as simple as some cracked solder joints. I believe this television was left outside in some way, shape, or form in the past, and that probably has something to do with it. But the S-Video and the Composite actually look really good on this thing. And it's just a damn shame because I would love to use it for its component capabilities, and I might try to get it looked at by a buddy of mine to see if he can suss out the problem. But honestly, what disturbs me the most is not that I can't use this TV, but it's just I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't know if it's just dead on that signal. It could be something that is as simple as needing a solder joint to be touched up and fixed. I just don't know. But I'm hoping to get this one looked at because it is really awesome, and I would still love to have it, but as of right now, it doesn't really work. So you have to kind of keep an eye out for that sort of thing. You might want to test the CRT, turn it on, bring something like the PSP Go, for example, something lightweight and easy to carry that has component cables to test it out and make sure it works before you leave with it, because I'm stuck with this now. So now we've got this Toshiba set over here. Toshibas are really, really good CRTs for the most part, and you know that depends on the model. This one is a pretty good one here. It's got every input that you could possibly want. We've got RF, component, composite, and S-Video as well. Plus, we got this really cool little door right here, which is a nice touch. I kind of like that. You know, the door is still intact, unlike the first CRT that we saw earlier. This is a very, very desirable one. It's got a flat screen panel there, and I believe this one can be RGB modified. Another thing that I like about this CRT is that you've got handles on the top, which is a big help when you have to move these things around. But this is a 24-inch set. The picture on these is really, really good. It's really awesome. The only thing I have to complain about this particular set is that the remote that it came with doesn't seem to work 100%. Which is kind of a pain in the butt because you need that remote to do a lot of different things with these CRTs. The menu button doesn't work, which is arguably probably the third most important button on there behind power and volume, right? And input, I guess, as well. But for the most part, everything that I've plugged into this TV looks really good. Even Composite looks pretty darn good for this set. And it's a 24-inch television, which is obviously bigger than a 20-inch television, which is what I have in my main setup. So I've been really considering changing that out and trying to put this one in its place just because it is that much bigger. If you see a Toshiba, you should look it up and make sure you know what you're getting as far as the inputs and everything, but for the most part, these are really good televisions and I really recommend them. This big boy is a Panasonic, and I believe it's either a 32 or a 36 inch. You have to understand that I've gone through a lot of CRTs and they're starting to bleed together. This is one that you will likely be finding. It's not a super big name brand. You know, it's a Panasonic, which they're not terrible, but they're not considered some of the best. This one right here cannot be RGB modified. It's got S-Video, which is actually a pretty big plus, and you've also got Composite as well and RF. It doesn't look that bad, and it's huge, which is a big plus. So if you're somebody that just wants a CRT just to play some NES or some N64, you could really take advantage of those inputs with a bigger TV like this. The problem is that it's freaking huge, and it'll take at least two of you to move it around, which is the reason that I'm on the floor right now, because I can't move this guy by myself. But I actually got this for free. An old friend of my mom's actually reached out to me and said, hey, you're into video game stuff, aren't you? We've got a CRT television if you want it. And so I got my buddy Scott, we got into the car and went and picked it up. Free is the best price. I don't see myself actually using this CRT for anything video game related for myself. So this is definitely a CRT that I'm probably going to be either donating or selling to someone locally. Now this guy right here is one of two 20-inch PVMs that I have. And I really, really do love this thing because it has such a gorgeous picture. I had this in a corner that I used to call the CRT corner, and that's where I kind of had a semi, retro setup where I have all the consoles that you can just sit down and play. And for the most part, this thing is really awesome. However, if you want to make adjustments on the picture, because this one is such an older model compared to some of the newer ones of the early 2000s, I believe this one is from the 90s. You actually have to take the back off of this thing and open it up and adjust it with some potentiometers, which is not fun, because how can you do that while simultaneously looking at the screen to see what the hell you're looking at? You'd have to get a mirror and sit it in front of the TV and be behind it and looking over and checking what your picture looks like, which is Not the best way to go about doing something like that, in my opinion, but still, this PVM is actually really good, and for the most part, people really like this one for what you can do. It has RGB, which is great. The only thing is that it doesn't do so well when you're in front of like natural daylight, so you kind of want to have this one away from the windows and stuff during the day, otherwise you get this really nasty glare. But I really do love this PVM a lot. This is one of 2 PVMs that I got from the same guy, which I'll talk about a little later in this video. These aren't cheap, and finding them is going to be really difficult, but if you can find something like this, I would really highly recommend that you grab it before somebody else does, because they're not getting any cheaper. Okay, so now we're on to the last CRT that I've got in the house, and you can see this one is front and center in my main living room setup here. This is the Olympus OEV203. But something interesting about it is that it has the Trinitron badge, which is normally a Sony thing. That's because this is just a rebranded Sony Trinitron PVM. It's pretty much the exact same thing on the inside, it's just they rebranded it as Olympus for some reason or another. I know for a fact that this guy was used in medical monitoring. In fact, this PVM and the last one that you saw were both from the same source. I got that from a gentleman that used to work in a hospital, and he had it on the Facebook Marketplace. I couldn't believe my eyes when I first saw it for the first time for sale, and I just had to negotiate. I talked him down a little bit. I got a pretty decent price for it, and it's been in my main setup ever since. This really changed a lot of things for me when I got this PVM for the first time, because I started messing with RGB inputs with SCART and BNC adapters and stuff like that. The reason I think that this one is still my main PVM is because it has an ability to go out with an RGB signal as well. So if I wanted to, I could take all my consoles and put them in the in signal and then send that signal out to whatever else I might want. So that could be anything from another PVM, another CRT, to an upscaler. You know, it doesn't really matter. But this is definitely one of my prized possessions as far as retro video gaming, and I don't think I could ever get rid of it, because when am I going to find something like this that's that cool again? You know, it's a really, really cool PVM. It's a 20-inch, and admittedly, compared to my OLED television, which is on the other side behind me there, sitting on this couch right there, it's a little far away, but I still use it anyway, because it's got a lot of great memories attached to it. I've had it for years. And if you find one of these things, I shouldn't have to tell you at this point, but grab it. So now we're moving on to the final CRT that I have to show off, and it looks just like the one that we saw at the very beginning. That's because it's the same thing. This one has actually been RGB modified. So normally, you'll only have a composite and RF signal on a TV like this, but some certain models, and you really have to try to figure out which model that it is specifically that you're looking at to know whether or not it can be RGB modified, but surprise, this has been RGB modified, and it's freaking awesome. So if we turn it around, we've got some different stuff going on back here, and I'll get some closer B-roll shots so you can actually see what's going on, but we've actually got a switch in there now, and you can switch between having that composite signal as well as this RGB signal, but you've got the SCART input right there on the back of the TV. To have that functionality restored to a CRT of this size is actually pretty cool, and those RGB modifications actually go up to, you know, much bigger televisions. We're talking like 24 inches and maybe even a little more if you can find one. But I just wanted to see if it was possible to get this done, because I found a website that shows you exactly what's going on and, you know, what to do and whether or not this is possible. I didn't do this myself. I had a buddy of mine do this, but still, I just wanted to do it, you know, because it's an RGB mod on a television that doesn't natively support that. And for the most part, it's really, really awesome. And if you have somebody that you know, or if you're brave enough to do it yourself, I would highly recommend that you try out an RGB mod on a CRT television, because it takes that signal where we're just so used to that ugly composite, and by upgrading that up to that RGB is such a major improvement. And on a TV like this small, it really, really looks awesome. So as you can tell, there's a ton of variety in these CRT TVs. It can be a bit overwhelming, but as long as you can lay out what you're looking for in a CRT experience, I'm sure you can find the perfect CRT to suit all of your needs. You just have to answer these questions for yourself. What consoles do I want to hook up? How big do I want it for my space? And do I want the standard or premium experience? And now we're getting to that part of the video. Let's talk all about PVMs.
Now we have to tackle the big question, consumer set or PVM. I probably talked about this at least briefly in my buying guide segment, but let's really get into it heavy here. Okay, so what the hell is a PVM? If you've watched any TV or movies from the early 2000s and maybe even the late 1990s, then you've seen these things. A great example of this is in the 1998 Will Smith film Enemy of the State. You can see them being used for security in a ton of different shots in that film. These things show up in huge box office hits too. Remember Titanic from James Cameron in 1997? They're viewing the video shots of the Titanic on the ocean floor through a PVM. These things weren't just used for security, but also for medical monitoring and broadcasting stations. PVM stands for Professional Video Monitor. PVMs used to be just another pile of e-waste, but now they're highly coveted by video game nerds because of their unique ability to accept an RGB SCART signal. Some of them even do composite and S-video. It's actually pretty easy to send a component signal to these things as well. However, finding a PVM is a very difficult task in 2025. Or I guess I should say, finding an affordable PVM is a difficult task. Over the last 10 years, I was lucky enough to find 4 PVMs in my general area, 2 of which came from the same guy that used to work in a hospital in a rural area outside of main city limits. He got them for free and sold them to me for a pretty good price. I'm in Arkansas, guys. It's going to be hard to find these things for sure, but if I can find 4 of them, then there's hope for the rest of you. But the big question really is, are they even worth the trouble? And personally, I have to say, yeah. Worth the trouble, but not worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to find them for cheap. CRTs have a certain charm to them, and PVMs are the premium, pro version of that charm. These scan lines are often much bigger and better, and there's a lot more of them. And when you have the correct video cables, the picture is pretty amazing in terms of brightness, color, and clarity. If you've never seen the Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo in beautiful RGB on a PVM, you're missing something pretty special. That being said, you absolutely do not need one to get a great image on a CRT. A good Sony CRT with component will give you a fairly comparable image, but the PVMs are always going to be just a little bit better. The question is, can you live with that? These PVMs are getting outrageously expensive. I don't want to date this video at all by telling you what they're currently going for, but some of them are up to the thousands of dollars now depending on the model. And as someone that's owned PVMs and enjoyed them for years, please don't pay that much for these things. They're pretty cool, but they're not $1,000 cool. I know, easy for me to say, right? So let's say that you do want a PVM. What steps should you take to find one? I hope you consider yourself to be a patient person. These things just aren't around anymore, but there are a few places left that you can try. Think about what these monitors were actually used for back in the day. The 3 big reasons would be for security, medical, or video production. I would try to get in contact with a hospital in an area not inside of a big city. You're looking for a facility that doesn't have big funding. Call the hospital and ask to speak to the tech guy. Just make sure that you don't harass them too much, okay? We're talking about a hospital here. They have human lives to worry about, and the last thing that they need is a guy bothering them every single day about getting a professional video monitor for free. Another good place to look would be radio or TV stations. Just give them a call and ask. You might be surprised and actually find something, but at the same time, don't be surprised if they have absolutely no idea what the hell you're talking about. Remember that these things haven't been relevant in that industry for at least 15 or 20 years now. A few years ago, I asked my dentist if he had any of these things in storage. Unfortunately, I just missed them. About a year before I asked him about these things, apparently they went to some kind of e-waste facility. Ouch. You can also check the Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, but let's be transparent here. I live in Central Arkansas, and I found a total of 5 PVMs in the last 10 years for sale on both of those platforms, and I got all but one of them. The only one I didn't get is actually a BVM, and that stands for Broadcast Video Monitor. These were pretty much used exclusively in TV stations and other facilities of that nature. And yep, it's still for sale on the Facebook Marketplace because this dude is asking $1,200 for a 13-inch monitor. Those 20-inch PVMs are great, but the 13-inch ones will just have you wanting a bigger one. And trust me, I have a lot of experience in this. This BVM has been on the marketplace for well over a year now, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only dude in this area that even wants it. Still, in the description he's saying that he'll be open for trades of car parts and other man stuff. If you've got some man stuff that you're willing to to trade, then by all means offer it to a seller that has a PVM. You might get lucky, but odds are that if there's a PVM for sale, then the seller will know that these things are very desirable, so get your wallet ready. Still, it's supply and demand, and depending on your area, you might be the only guy in 100 miles that even know that these things exist, so don't be afraid to haggle. Now we've got to talk about eBay. These monitors are for sale on eBay all the time at a premium price. Personally, I would never buy or sell any sort of CRT online. You're just asking for trouble in the shipping department. These things are so heavy and fragile, and unless they're packed extremely well, you're likely going to have a damaged CRT coming in the mail. Not to mention the shipping cost to move these heavy sons of guns. I've heard stories of people that managed to ship CRTs using a combination of heavy bubble wrap and swimming pool noodles around the base for stabilization, but I'm still not convinced. These things are just too expensive to risk something like that, but you know, that's just my opinion. One of the most coveted PVMs would probably be the Sony 20L5. Some people are attempting to sell this 20-inch CRT for upwards of $2 or even sometimes $3 grand. Don't pay that, please. A good 20-inch PVM shouldn't cost as much as a used car. I can tell you that these things are awesome, but they're not that awesome. You can still get a great experience that's pretty close to, if not basically on par with a PVM. Let's talk about some consumer sets that are among the most popular in retro gaming circles. CRTs can really vary pretty widely in terms of quality, but I think we can probably narrow it down to the big three. Sony Trinitrons are by far the most coveted for retro video games, and it's for good reason. I've never had a bad experience with Sony consumer sets. They're good, but I don't think you should pay something like an extra $100 just to get one, you know? I think they're really coveted because of the Trinitron name. For the most part, this name is synonymous with quality. Generally, these Sony Trinitron sets look pretty damn good for retro gaming, and a lot of them have component and even S-video. If you find a Sony Trinitron that meets all of your needs as far as the size and the video inputs, then I'd say definitely jump on it, as long as the price is right. RCA TruFlats are also a really good option. Flat screen CRTs might be a better option to someone that's used to flat screen modern displays, but generally, curved CRTs are the standard. Flat screen CRTs are quote-unquote modern CRTs that almost always feature component inputs, but they can be difficult to hunt down, more so than the average CRT. Toshiba sets are also very good options, but they kind of vary by model. This Toshiba set that I got recently looks really fantastic with all of the inputs, and it's a 24-inch TV. I think this is the sweet spot as far as size. Usually any bigger than this and all you'll get is component or S-video if you're lucky, but don't take my word for it. JVC iArts are also a very good CRT that many recommend, but I haven't had any personal experience with them myself. Just make sure you do your research on each model of CRT before you go haul one off somewhere. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to a website called the CRT Database. There you can find all sorts of information about a CRT, including video inputs, capable resolutions, and whether or not they can be RGB modified. This is a really cool website that we're honestly very lucky to have. Whoever runs this website, thank you for your service. We appreciate you. One other thing to be aware of is that there is such a thing as CRT hoarding, and I do mean hoarding. Yes, I see the irony in this because I'm the dude that just showed you 7 CRTs in one video. But I want you to understand that I collected these so I had a nice variety to show in a video all about CRTs. After this video is done, I'm going to sell most of these for a good price locally because I just don't need 7 CRTs in my house. PVM hoarding is another story. I'm torn about this. On one hand, I'm really furious at all of these guys that buy up all the PVMs in their area just to have them sitting in their garage. If you check the Facebook group, the CRT Collective, you'll find a ton of these guys bragging about having a wall of PVMs that they'll quite frankly never use. It's very selfish and pointless. There are a lot of guys getting into this hobby that would love to have just one good PVM to tinker with. These things are kind of mythical to some people, especially those that don't have access to getting their hands on one. But on the other hand, I'm the guy that has 3 PVMs in his house. I can't possibly use them all at once. Does that mean I'm the same as the hoarder guy on Facebook? Maybe. I still use the 2 bigger PVMs, but the smaller one is a novelty. Something in me just won't let me sell these things though. Maybe it's a fear of missing out. I have a feeling that I just won't be able to buy these things later if I sell them now. At least not at the great price that I originally bought them for. Maybe 3 PVMs are too much for one guy. But I'll leave the answer to that question to you guys in the comment section below.
We've gone over the basics, where to find some of these CRTs, and the inputs you'll need to look for depending on your video game console of choice. This should help you find the CRT that's right for you, and I think that if you're patient and at times a little persistent, you can find one more easily than you might imagine. But that's just the beginning. This is old technology that we're dealing with, and with old tech comes a few problems that might not be the easiest to solve on your own.
CRTs are amazing, but they certainly have their flaws, and those flaws don't get any better with age. Finding a CRT for cheap is great, but sometimes these things don't function properly. This can be really frustrating considering that getting these sets repaired isn't as easy as it was 20 or 30 years ago, and getting a refund on a CRT is the punchline to a very bad joke. Some of the best CRTs have been around for 30 years and even older than that. When you have technology that old, then you have capacitors that are just as old. So what's a capacitor? Capacitors, or caps, are these little miniature Coke can looking things on the inside of pretty much anything electronic from that era all the way up to today. They store electrical energy that is vital to keeping your electronics working properly. If the capacitors go bad, then things stop working properly and they can even leak, which will cause even more damage. If your display isn't giving you a clear picture, or if something is obviously horribly wrong with the picture, then it's likely that you have some failing capacitors on your CRT. This is no easy thing to fix, and that's even for somebody that's pretty adept at soldering. Your old video game consoles may have leaking capacitors as well. It's a good idea to open those things up and check them out. You don't want to have to deal with leaking capacitors. Trust me. Replacing caps on old consoles is actually a pretty easy thing to do for the most part, and it's even a great place to start if you're a novice at soldering. The only risk is that you might screw up something on the console if you're not careful. The skill level needed to do these repairs often depends on the console. Sega Game Gear caps are really small surface mount capacitors, while the Super Nintendo caps are the larger Coke can looking ones. It takes a steady hand to remove and replace these things carefully. Opening up a CRT is a huge risk, and I don't recommend it to anyone watching this video. These TVs can carry upwards of 15,000 volts of electricity even when they aren't plugged in, and you can seriously hurt yourself by opening them and touching the wrong thing. In order to work on the inside of a CRT safely, you'll need to learn how to properly discharge it. This involves a certain amount of skill. The skill can be learned, but if you're like me, you like to learn with a hands-on approach. It's incredibly tough to learn when there is no local class or teacher that you can get that hands-on approach with. You have to understand that the vast majority of consumers don't care about these CRTs anymore. CRT nerds like us are desperate for a class that doesn't exist. The only teachers are on YouTube, and every CRT is different. Learning about working on CRTs isn't like learning the guitar. There are several different models of guitars and CRTs out there, but you can play every guitar pretty much the same way. CRTs are vastly more complicated than that on the inside. You're going to need a schematic to know exactly what you're dealing with, and depending on your model of CRT, that might not be the easiest thing to find. I often feel really helpless and uneducated when tasked with any sort of CRT repair. It's kind of scary, man. Please don't ever attempt to do internal maintenance on a CRT unless you have the proper training and protective equipment. You should never attempt something like this unless you know what you're doing. My dumbass decided to open up a PVM a few years ago, and I got shocked. It went all the way up from my middle finger into my heart, and I felt it skip a beat or two. It was not fun at all. I mentioned that my 13-inch Sony Trinitron was RGB modified a while ago. This was done by my friend Jeff, who is a professional electronics repair and mod guy. I asked him to help me do this just for this video, and to be very honest, he was literally my only hope in getting this done.
That's another point that I'd like to make. Finding someone skilled to do these repairs and mods might be difficult depending on where you're located. I live in a very rural state, and Jeff was the only guy I could find to do this. TV repair guys aren't as common as they used to be, and finding a guy that can do repairs on a CRT is going to be harder as the years go by. It's likely a skill that's going to die with the older guys. The demand just isn't there anymore for CRT repair like it was back in the day. And I often wonder just how long into the future this skill will go before it becomes extinct.
That being said, if you do find yourself a PVM or consumer set that you want to keep around for years to come, it might be a good idea to try to get the capacitors replaced. I currently have 3 PVMs, and I know that I'll need to get them recapped and serviced eventually. I hope that Jeff is up to that task when the time comes, because I don't know of many others in my area that would be able to help. I definitely don't want to deal with shipping a CRT or even driving out of state just to get some capacitors replaced. I consider myself to be a pretty tech-savvy guy. After all, I'm a millennial, and we grew up with the beginnings of the internet and Windows computers. I learned how to do a bunch of really cool stuff with older tech, like soft modding a Wii and an original Xbox, replacing old screens with higher quality ones in an original Game Boy, and even opening up controllers and consoles to clean them and replace a few capacitors when it's needed. All of that stuff seems doable for me. There are a lot of guides and previous examples of these things being done by people that I can rely on for guidance. However, CRT repair is another beast. I feel like most CRT repair guys have some sort of background in the electrical field and possibly even engineering. I'm too afraid to open this thing up and mess around because I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. And I don't have a reliable source to ask questions about it. Because of the possibility of literally shocking yourself to death, I feel as though I need proper training from an expert to even attempt this kind of thing myself. Unfortunately, that expert just doesn't exist in my area. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place, but the idea of repairing a CRT always seems like a math problem that I'm just never going to be able to solve on my own. It's way too high above my confidence level. Finally, we have to address geometry. These CRTs can have a great picture, but sometimes it requires a bit of tweaking. If you're a tinkerer, then this will delight you beyond reason. It's actually a lot of fun, and super satisfying if you can get the geometry just right. Most CRTs feature a secret set of options called the service menu. This was accessed by repair guys back in the day. You can tweak a ton of things here, including the sub-brightness, conversion, color, and overall just the way that the image appears on the screen. This can be kind of dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, but I've never destroyed a CRT beyond recognition just by tinkering with the service menu. There should be an option to save your settings before exiting, so you should be fine. It's always a good idea to jot things down that you've changed just to be safe. It can be kind of scary seeing a ton of options that you aren't familiar with, but there's always some kind of guide out there to show you what you're actually changing. Most CRTs and PVMs will allow you to adjust all of this by using just the remote, but some of them require you to actually open up the set and physically move some potentiometers or pots to make those adjustments yourself. It's a great idea to have a mirror handy for this, as it'll be really tough to see what you're doing while you're making adjustments from behind the TV. Whoever decided to do it this way is not my favorite person. I haven't worked up the courage to do that on the PVM that I have that requires this method, but I'm sure eventually I'm going to have to do it. For assisting your geometry adjustments, there's a quote-unquote game called the 240p Test Suite. This can be purchased for a CD-based or even cartridge-based console, or you can just burn a copy to a CDR or put a ROM on a flash cart like the EverDrive. Good geometry can be the difference between a good and bad experience with the CRT. There's a channel here on YouTube called Retrotech, and a fella named Steve does all sorts of content related to CRT TVs, including adjusting geometry and in-depth CRT repairs. His videos are great, but if you're looking for something really specific, it can be difficult to follow him. It's a lot like learning a musical instrument via YouTube. You can learn a lot, but one thing that you can't do is ask personal questions related to your specific issues, which is why getting a music teacher is always the best option. I teach video game music on the guitar, by the way, just if you're interested. Unfortunately, CRT geometry teachers just don't exist. One other thing worth mentioning is the difference between interlaced and progressive images. Think about the Sega Genesis, SNES, N64, and the TurboGrafx-16. Those consoles primarily use a 240p signal. The P stands for progressive image. Some consoles, like the PS2, use what's called 480i, which is an interlaced image. 480i looks pretty terrible on a modern display these days, but on a CRT it doesn't look that bad. Some of my buddies have come over to play the PS2 after 20 years without using a CRT, and most all of them notice a flicker effect on the screen. That's the interlaced image. It's kind of bouncy. It can be really bothersome and almost irritating to someone that's not really used to it. But if you're a fan of the PS2, then it's worth getting used to, because a large portion of the PS2 library uses 480i. And then you have 480p, which is a progressive image, and here comes a few problems. Video game consoles didn't start taking advantage of this until the 6th generation of consoles. So we're talking about the original Xbox, the Sega Dreamcast, the Nintendo GameCube, and even the PS2 had a few games that could take advantage of 480p, but they are very few and far between. The problem is that most consumer sets and even most PVMs can't display a 480p image. You'll have to get used to either 240p or 480i. A common misconception is that 240p is inferior because it's the lower number. No, dude. Some of the best games display at 240p, and they look amazing on a CRT because that's their native resolution. None of my CRTs or PVMs can render a 480p image, and this sucks. You remember me talking about that $3,000 Sony 20L5 PVM a while back? The reason why this particular PVM is fetching prices well into the thousands is because it's something called a multi-format PVM. All that means is that it can display a wider variety of resolutions, and some of these things can do 480p, 720p, and even as far as 1080i. Most of us will just have to be satisfied with a 240p image. To be honest, 240p looks great on a CRT. In fact, most of us prefer 240p on a CRT. Even 480i on the PS2 is worth getting used to because the image just looks a hell of a lot cleaner on a CRT. My super expensive RetroTink 4K upscaler doesn't do the PS2 justice. Keep in mind that as of the making of this video and likely several years into the future, the RetroTink 4K is the best video upscaler that money can buy. And still, the PS2 just looks messy. It's not any fault of the upscaler, it's just the way that the PS2 handles video. It's really strange to think that the Sega Dreamcast could do beautiful 480p through VGA and it failed. And yet the PS2 has some of the worst looking video of any home console ever, and yet it's the best selling console of all time. YouTubers My Life in Gaming and Digital Foundry have a collaboration episode on why the PS2 looks and behaves the way it does if you're interested in learning more about that. These games were made with the CRT in mind, and that's why they still look so good on them. Just because your CRT has component inputs, that doesn't mean it can do 480p. I learned that lesson the hard way. If you've got a CRT in mind that you want to get for yourself, make sure you look up the model number and see which resolutions it supports. Another issue that you're likely going to encounter with CRTs are the sheer weight of them. Contrary to popular belief, not all of these weigh over 300 pounds, but some of them actually do. If you're going to go pick up a CRT, check around on the internet for specs on that specific model. You should already be doing this anyway to know which inputs it's going to have, but you'll definitely want to find out the weight of it too. It's good to know whether or not you'll need to bring a buddy to help you move it, but here's a useful tip. If it's bigger than 13 inches, bring a buddy anyways. This big Sanyo is just way too heavy to move by myself. Could I do it? Yeah, probably. But I don't want to risk my back at the old age of 32. You could absolutely hurt yourself with these things. Another problem that you might not think about is this. Where are you going to put this bad boy once you get it in your home? And you might be thinking, what are you talking about, dude? I'm just going to put it on my TV stand. That may or may not be a great idea. You have to understand that pretty much everything changed when LCDs came into the picture around 2008 or so. TV stands just aren't as robust as they used to be, especially now. It's a great idea to check the weight capacity of some of these newer and likely cheaper entertainment stands. If you've got something on Amazon for a few $100, it's a good bet that it's not made out of solid wood and therefore not meant to handle the weight of a big CRT. These were designed for flat screen TVs that weigh so much less. Just be cautious and do your research, okay? The last thing that we want is for you to put your heavy CRT on some furniture that can't hold it. There's 2 things at risk here. 3 if you count your pets. We don't want anything to come crashing down on them or you for that matter. No CRT experience is worth injury to anyone or anything. We can solve this issue while keeping the vintage theme here. Old school CRT, old school entertainment stand. Here's my granny cabinet that I featured in my game room tour video. I bought this used on the Facebook Marketplace years ago for about $80. It's all solid wood, just the kind of material you'll want for a heavy CRT. This might be a bad example for you because this thing is kind of huge and it takes up a ton of space vertically, and that might not be for everybody. Just like CRTs, these old school stands and entertainment centers are fading. They're getting a little harder to find, especially with cheaper Amazon furniture really flooding the market. You can go with these super cheap and easy to find wire racks that they used to use in a bunch of restaurants. They're made of metal and designed to hold a lot of weight. I did the same thing with all my retro video game consoles. Is it unpleasant to look at? Yeah, depending on the person, it sure is. But it's functional, and it's great for heat dispersal, and not to mention it's a hell of a lot easier to clean. Dust can wreak havoc on anything electronic, and you don't want a ton of dust gathering inside of your electrical equipment. Still, I've got to admit that my little CRT corner over here would be a hell of a lot cozier if I had a big piece of wooden furniture to sit them on. These are all things that you should consider before you get a big CRT, not after. It's basically like getting a new cat or something like that. You want to get the litter box and the food and the toys before you bring the cat home. That way you don't have to panic and freak out when you find out you don't have something that you need.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't give you some alternatives to CRTs. They're freaking awesome, but they're just not for everyone, and that's okay. There are several ways to enjoy real hardware without them, but most of them are pretty expensive.
Let's start with a few of these $30 console-specific quote-unquote upscalers and HDMI adapters that you can find on Amazon. These are notorious for introducing input lag and giving you a smudgy, blurry image. If you want to play the original Xbox on your modern TV, then this might work for you because you can get used to that input lag over time, but it's terrible, dude. Save your money for something better. It's worth it, especially if you're planning on using more than one console in your setup. Emulation is likely what most of you guys will be doing instead of using a CRT. It's the ultimate way to play all of your retro video games while simultaneously saving a ton of money. No overspending on legit copies of rare games, no having to buy the original controllers, and best of all, no worrying about video cables and signals. This might be the ultimate solution for some of you. However, as someone that's dabbled in emulation across multiple different platforms over the last 20 years, it just gets boring over time. When you have everything on your PC, you can lose a lot of charm that goes with these consoles. I like to use original hardware because it's nostalgic for me. It's even more amazing to get an old console that you never played back in the day and experience it for the first time. For me, that console is the TurboGrafx 16, or the PC Engine as it was known in Japan. I never heard of it when I was a kid, but having the controllers and the console here physically in front of me is a really cool experience. It's a lot like going back in time, if that makes sense. You're also going to miss out on physical media. Much like CRTs, physical media seems to be slowly fading away. I don't know about you guys, but I tend to gravitate towards a game more if I own it physically. Actually, owning things is actually pretty cool. If you guys want to emulate, then by all means do whatever you want to do. But I'll bet that if you made it this far into the video, then emulation probably isn't scratching that itch that you have. Yes, the section of the video reserved for the big spenders and the connoisseurs of video games. Upscalers are such a great option if you can't justify the space for CRTs. They offer you a lot more than you might expect. You can add artificial scan lines, inject HDR, and adjust the image pretty much any way possible. Some of the best ones over the years have been the RGB Mini Framemeister, the OSSC, and the Rolls Royce of upscalers, the RetroTink 4K. These things aren't cheap, but they're designed for guys like me, dudes that have a lot of video game consoles that they want to get the best possible picture out of on their display. I justified the cost because it checks two boxes for me. It gives me what I want out of my consoles for my own enjoyment, and it's great for capturing footage for YouTube. You can even use some of these upscalers to take signals from modern consoles and downscale them for use on a CRT. Corey from My Life in Gaming has a huge video all about doing just that with a Nintendo Switch. It's not exactly a plug-and-play solution though. Some games don't line up on a CRT perfectly at all. Be sure to do your research if you're looking into getting an upscaler. At the time of this video, the RetroTink 4K is by far the most expensive, but it's the best upscaler that we'll likely see for video games pretty much ever. You don't have to spend nearly $1,000 to get a good upscaler though. The RetroTink 5X is still a great product that allows you to upscale to even 1440p, and all of those scan line options are there too. If that's still too rich for your blood, I would recommend looking into the RetroTink 2X. It's just a line doubler, but it will be a hell of a lot cleaner and more lag-free than just plugging your console directly into a modern display, and it sure as hell beats those crappy $30 HDMI cables on Amazon. I'm curious to know what you guys think about upscalers versus CRTs, and if you're a super nerd like me, then the answer is, why not both? I'm sure by now that you've noticed that there's quite a lot to these chunky boy TVs. It's not as easy as just plugging in an HDMI cable and pressing play. I think we've just gotten used to the simplicity of HDMI over the last 10 or 15 years. HDMI can carry a ton of different resolutions, such as 720p, 1080p, 1440p, and now we even have 4K and even 8K resolutions becoming the new standard. Analog signals have a lot of variety, and you can really customize your experience on a CRT. RGB or YPB-PR is technically the superior champion of CRT cables, but that doesn't mean that you have to use them in your setup. For a while, I just went with Composite for pretty much all of my consoles, and it was just fine. Sure, S-Video looks a hell of a lot better, but it's really whatever you want to do, man. I'm a tinkerer at heart. I like screwing with things. I used to play my Sega Genesis sitting on the carpet looking up at that CRT screen. Today, I still use a CRT to play my Sega Genesis, only now we've got high quality RGB SCART cables that can tap into the stereo audio jack, and an EverDrive capable of not only playing every Sega Genesis game, but also every Sega CD game without the need of a Sega CD console. This would have absolutely blown my mind as a small kid. Using these upgrades on a CRT is just cool. One of the main reasons that I still like to use older retro consoles instead of emulation is simply because I can. Think about this. Will anyone still care about the PS2 100 years from now? Will they care about the Sega Genesis or the Nintendo 64? Will they care about CRTs for that matter? Will there even be any of them left? I play on original hardware because I know that eventually I'm gonna die. So why not enjoy this stuff while it's still around, while you still can, while you still have fond memories of it, and while you can still share it with somebody that you love? It's not obsolete just because it's old. The same thing can be said about CRTs. Sure, you can buy yourself a nice upscaler to help you enjoy these consoles, or you can just say screw it and emulate everything on your modern gaming PC. I choose to play games on a CRT because it's my window into the past. It reminds me of a simpler time. It's one of those simple things that's exactly the same as it was back then. Only now, we can revisit them with better knowledge about video signals, console modifications, and higher quality video cables. At 32 years of age, I've been exposed to what happens to a person when something or someone is no longer around. It's made me that much more aware of respecting and appreciating what you have while you are still around. It's true what they say. Life is really short. If you want to be that weird guy that's into CRTs and retro video game hardware, then be that guy. You do not have to justify your reasons to anyone. You know what you like, and that should be enough. Nostalgia is a very powerful feeling. It represents that special moment in time where you were there. At the end of the day, these are all just windows into a world of escapism. Whether you're a hardcore gamer or just a dude that likes to play that one Nintendo game that you used to play when you were a kid, when you have the spare free time to do so. There is a difference between playing on a CRT and a modern display, and nothing I could say in a video could prove that to you. You're just gonna have to try it out for yourself. And like I've stated earlier in this video, CRTs aren't for everyone, but I would encourage everyone to at least give it a try. We've become so used to modern screens with our smartphones and 4K monitors and OLED televisions, and you may have forgotten just how great an image on a CRT can actually look. Despite how complicated CRTs are on the inside, ironically they're a great reminder of how simple things used to be. There was no DLC in gaming, no downloading updates, or overpaying on a monthly subscription just to play a few rounds with your friends online. There were no battle passes or season passes to deal with. You just turn on that CRT, sit down on the couch or your comfy chair, and just play. That reminder is worth a lot to me, and emulation could never replace that. This is why I choose to continue playing retro video games on a CRT, and I'll continue to do so until CRTs stop working altogether or I die, whichever comes first. I hope you found this video informative. What did I miss regarding CRTs? Do you still play video games on a CRT, or do you play retro video games some other way? Let me know the answers to all those questions in the comment section below. I hope you'll check out some of the other retro video game content I have here on my YouTube channel while you're here. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll catch you guys at the next video. Bye-bye.